"Hey, I am Donald, so let's go." When my friends Joe, Bill, Mark, and I arrived at my place, the early sun had just begun to paint the sky orange and pink. Our van was filled with our favorite food, a cooler full of drinks, and our bags. The atmosphere was filled with curiosity and excitement. We had recently graduated from college and were about to start a new chapter in our lives. To celebrate this milestone and our newfound independence, we planned a road trip. As we loaded up the car, we double-checked our supplies. Joe, always the jokester, had prepared a playlist of our favorite songs, a mix of old classics and new hits that would serve as the soundtrack of our journey. Bill, ever the planner, had a map spread out on the hood of the car, marking out the route we would take and the towns we would visit. Mark, the quiet one, was busy checking the car to ensure it was road trip ready. Finally, with a cheer, we set off. The open road lay ahead of us, promising an adventure of a lifetime. Little did we know then the twists and turns that awaited us on this journey. But that's a story for another day. Just as we were getting into the rhythm of the road, our trusted GPS, which had been guiding us flawlessly until now, started glitching. It rerouted us away from the familiar highway onto a narrow, winding road that wasn't on any of our maps. We exchanged puzzled glances, but decided to follow the new route, thinking it might be a hidden gem waiting to be discovered. As we walked further, the scenery changed dramatically. The busy towns and broad fields gave way to deep, towering forests, casting lengthy shadows across the road. The chirping of birds had been replaced by an eerie silence, interrupted only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional scream of an owl. The atmosphere was unpleasant, yet it also had a peculiar beauty that drew us in. And then, out of nowhere, we spotted it, an ancient, abandoned amusement park. It stood in the middle of the forest like a forgotten remnant from another period. The thrills in Stan's bright shades had faded, and the structures had cracked and been covered with grass. The scene was strangely mysterious. The atmosphere was unsettling, but there was also a strange beauty to it that kept us going. We opted to investigate since we were curious and had a strong sense of adventure. The park, which had once been alive with laughter and joy, was now silent and disappointing. But there was a tale waiting to be revealed, and we were pulled to it. Little did we know that our diversion was about to turn into a terrifying adventure. We entered a decaying building that appeared to have formerly served as the amusement park's information center. The air inside was thick with dust, and what had once been an exciting place was now nothing but broken furniture and faded posters. In a corner, we discovered a box full of old newspaper clippings. As we sifted through them, one headline stood out: "Unsolved disappearances linked to park." The words sent shivers down our spines. We crowded around Joe, who held his flashlight firmly while reading the text. The report described a series of mysterious disappearances of visitors to the park. Each story was shockingly similar. People visiting the park and then never appearing again. No signs, no clues. It just vanished, as if swallowed by the park itself. The scary silence of the park now took on a more sinister tone. Each creak of the old vehicles and rustle of the foliage seemed to mirror the stories we had just read. Despite the horror scratching at the pit of our stomachs, our curiosity forced us to investigate further. We couldn't shake the notion that we were about to find a long-lost story. Just as we were about to leave the information center, a startling sound echoed through the silence. It was a low growl, similar to an animal's, but with an eerie human quality. We turned around and our hearts skipped a beat. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its shape unclear but frightening. Panic flooded through us like a wave of water. Our minds shouted for us to run, and we did. We rushed towards our car, but it was parked too far away, and the person was closing in on us. We could hear its heavy footsteps becoming louder, matching the frantic beat of our hearts. In our desperation, we found an old stall nearby. Without hesitation, we ran inside, hoping to lose the figure in a system of decaying structures. We held our breath and listened as the creature stalked outside, its growls sending shivers down our spines. That's when we discovered it, a hidden tunnel behind the stall. It was narrow and dark, but it was our only hope. The figure was still searching for us outside. We squeezed into the tunnel, praying that it would lead us to safety. The tunnel was dark, and the air was thick and musty. It was barely wide enough for us to move around, and the walls were cold and sweaty to the touch. But terror gave us speed. We could hear a person enter the tunnel behind us, their growls reverberating off the walls. The sound was scary, a continual reminder of the danger that was right at our heels. The tunnel seemed to go on indefinitely, a never-ending puzzle in the center of the earth. Our hearts raced in our chests, and every shadow made us jump. But after what seemed like an eternity, we noticed a faint light at the end of the tunnel. Hope extended through us. We were nearly safe, but as we approached the end of the tunnel, the figure leaped for us. Its shape was a terrible sight in the low light. We nearly avoided its strike, and our hearts skipped a beat as we felt it sweep by us. We made a snap decision at that moment. We split off, each following a different way through the tunnel. The figure stopped, alerted by our quick movement, giving us a precious few seconds to establish some distance between us and it. We emerged from the maze of tunnels into the chilly night air, gasping for breath and with our hearts hammering. Our automobile was a short distance away, its familiar shape displaying the darkness. We rushed for it. Our footsteps echo in the silence of the night. With trembling hands, I tried the keys, the metallic clatter ringing out loud in the silence. Finally, the key was inserted into the ignition, and the car started with a roar of relief. The headlights pierced through the darkness, creating lengthy shadows that danced and flared. We sped away immediately, leaving the terrible creature and the ghostly amusement park behind. The tires crunched on the rough road, and the sound faded as we got further away from the park. As we drove away, I looked in the rear mirror one final time. The person stood at the park's entrance, lighted by moonlight. It remained there, watching us as we vanished into the night. Once we were at a safe distance, we pulled off at a neighborhood diner, our hands still trembling and our hearts racing. We decided to file a report with the local authorities. We believed they could shed further insight into the figure in the abandoned amusement park. However, when we described our horrific encounter, they rejected it as a prank. They couldn't believe such a location existed, let alone that we were being hunted by a supernatural entity. We had no choice but to accept their response, even though we knew what we were experiencing was real. We couldn't get the memories of that night out of our heads for several days. Every creak of a door and shadow in the corner of our eyes transported us back to the haunted amusement park. Sleep was difficult to come by, and when it came, it was accompanied by nightmares about the creature hunting us. Hey there, my name's Kelly. It all started like any other day. My cousins, brother, their boyfriend, and I decided to hit the road for a trip. We were happy and ready for the adventure ahead. The car ride began with laughs and music blasting. We went down a beautiful path surrounded by wildlife. The route was lined with trees which served as green guides. But things took a turn when we got near a creepy forest. Our car started acting up, making weird noises. Then, oh no, it died. We were lost in the middle of nowhere, with only the forest as a company. No phones either, no signal. The sun had dropped low, casting long shadows that made everything appear eerie. Our car breaking down next to the forest wasn't exactly what we planned. Little did we know, the real adventure was just starting. We knew we were stuck, way out of nowhere. With no choice, we decided to brave the forest and look for help. Armed with just our phone flashlights, we left the safety of our car and stepped into the dark unknown. The forest was thick and there was no clear path. The only sounds were the leaves crunching under our feet and an owl hooting way off in the distance. It felt like forever, but then we saw something through the thick trees. A building. As we got closer, we realized it was a tiny house, all beat up and falling apart. It looked totally empty, like nobody had lived there in ages. Broken windows and a yard filled with weeds made it seem even older, like something from a history book. It just stood there, quiet and spooky, completely different from the lively forest around it. Seeing the house gave us a little spark of hope, but as we walked towards it, a weird feeling started creeping up on us. Even though the house was falling apart, it felt like it had a secret, a story waiting to be told, and somehow we were about to be part of it. We moved closer to the house, and the weird noises got louder by the second. Then, out of the corner of our eye, we saw someone. He was wearing a long black dress that matched the darkness of the forest. We froze, our hearts hammering in our chests. Something about the figure standing there, so still and quiet, freaked us all out. Suddenly, the figure saw us and let out a terrifying scream. It bounced off the trees, making us jump a mile. It was a scream filled with pure meanness, a sound we'd never forget in a million years. Panic took over. We didn't even think. We just turned and ran as fast as we could, desperate to escape whatever horror awaited us in that dark forest. The fear of the unknown drove us forward, our only goal being to get as far away from that chilling scream as possible, with the black figure chasing after us. The forest, which just a minute ago felt peaceful and pretty, now seemed like a giant maze trying to trap us. The trees seemed to be closing in, and the path back to our car felt like it stretched on forever. We ran like crazy, our lungs burning, until finally we saw the shape of our car in the distance. It felt like forever. But as we got closer, we saw something else, police cars. They were parked next to ours, lights flashing like giant flashlights cutting through the dark. It was like seeing a magic light show, a sign of hope in the scary forest. We walked towards our car, completely out of breath, just as the black figure stepped out of the trees. But when it saw the police cars, it froze for a second, then disappeared back into the forest like smoke. We leaned against the car, gasping for air, when a couple of police officers walked up to us. They were all business at first, asking why we left our car on a lonely road in the dark. But then they saw how scared we were, and their faces softened a bit. We spilled the whole story, the weird noises, the creepy figure in black, and the chase that felt like a nightmare. The police listened to our story, not sure if they believed us, but worried at the same time. They searched the forest and the creepy house super carefully, but couldn't find any sign of the black figure. It was like he just disappeared. We tried to get back to normal after that, but it was hard. Every little sound, every shadow, and everything weird reminded us of the black figure. It was like that whole experience was burned into our brains, and it changed how we saw things. We couldn't forget that terrifying night. Our fun road trip turned into a total nightmare. But even though it was scary, we learned something important. Sometimes you gotta be brave even when you're scared, and the scariest things can also teach you the most. Hey there, I'm John, a reporter who travels around for stories. I just wrapped up a super creepy story in a small town. People just kept disappearing and everyone was scared. Feeling bummed, I packed my car to head back home to the big busy city. To unwind, I decided to take a scenic route through the countryside, hoping the pretty views would cheer me up. The sun was setting, making long shadows everywhere as I got on the highway. The open road looked awesome, and I took a deep breath, happy to leave that spooky town behind. It was a peaceful drive with barely any cars and tons of cool stuff to see. We're talking rolling hills, giant fields, and even dark and mysterious forests. Every now and then I'd pass a tiny town with all of its lights twinkling like fireflies. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted it. A super old car parked on the side of the road, all alone. It looked creepy in the dark, and I got a weird feeling in my stomach. Why would someone just leave their car in such a deserted place? It didn't make any sense. Curiosity got the better of me, so I pulled over to check it out. I stepped out of my car, and the cool night air gave me goosebumps. Everything got super quiet as I walked closer to the abandoned car. Peeking inside, all I saw was dust and the car keys swinging back and forth. Who would leave their car unlocked in the middle of nowhere? It was super strange. Suddenly, a faint cry for help broke the silence. It sounded like it was coming from the woods nearby. I wasn't sure if I actually heard it at first, but then I heard it again. A cry carried by the wind. What was going on? My whole body tensed up like someone was yelling at me to get back in the car and drive away fast. But what if someone needed help? Could I just leave them there? Even though I knew it could be dangerous, I couldn't just ignore a cry for help. So I decided to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight from the car and aimed it at the dark woods. The trees looked like creepy guards, their shadows dancing on the ground like monsters. I heard leaves rustling and an owl hooting way off in the distance, but that was it. The deeper I went, the creepier I felt. It seemed like the woods were squeezing me in and the darkness felt like a thick blanket. But I kept going, hoping to find whoever needed help. Suddenly, oh God, a twig snapped right behind me. I turned around, my heart hammering like a drum solo. Through the thick leaves, I could just barely see a figure. It was a man, but his face was hidden behind a mask. Fear froze me for a second, but then I knew I had to get out of there. I took off running like a scared rabbit. Branches scratched my face as I pushed through the bushes, gasping for air. I could hear the man crashing through the woods behind me, his heavy footsteps getting closer. Finally, I burst out of the trees and saw my car. I didn't even slow down, I just raced towards it, clutching my keys like my life depended on them. My whole body was shaking, but I slammed the car door shut and locked it as fast as I could. I didn't even peek back as I started the engine, the loud roar filling the quiet night. I threw the car in reverse, the gravel crunching under my tires as I backed away. Then, I shifted into drive, slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and the car shot forward. I didn't look back once, leaving the creepy woods and the masked man far, far behind. As I flew down the empty road, my heart thumped like a drum solo. Leaves still rustled, twigs still snapped, and the masked man's footsteps echoed in my head. But for now, I was safe. I didn't stop driving until I saw the bright lights of a toll booth. Shaking, I told the guy there about the crazy night. He called the police right away. While I waited, I kept replaying everything over and over. The creepy car, the cry for help, the scary chase. The police finally showed up and I told them everything, my hands still jittery. They promised to search the woods right away. I sat in my car watching their red and blue lights disappear towards the dark trees. The rest of the drive was a fuzzy mess. My mind kept going back to that night. The abandoned car, the cry, the chase. I drove super carefully, every tiny shadow making me jump. Finally, as the sun peeked up, I pulled into my driveway, relief washing over me. I was home, safe and sound. But that night would stay with me forever. The terror, the chase, the fear of the unknown, I wouldn't forget it. The next morning, news reports said the police found clues of something bad happening near the abandoned car. They saw signs of a struggle close by. My whole body tingled. I'd been right next to danger and somehow escaped. In the end, I learned a big lesson. Even if a road looks amazing and the trip seems cool, you gotta stay sharp and listen to your gut. You never know what lurks in the shadows.